Kuenssberg.
Problem of our time or failure of political will? Can this government end thousands of dangerous journeys in small boats? I've been in Rome with the Home Secretary who's hailing the biggest number of migrants sent home in years, but won't tell you or me when the number of small boats will fall.
Of course we want to see the boat crossings come down as rapidly as possible. What we're not going to do is deal this by slogans.
And with us this morning, live in the studio, her opposite number, Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, after his party promised and then failed to stop the boats. And scary future, fantastic opportunity, or a bit of both. Artificial intelligence is here to stay. The chair of one of the new tech supergiants tells us it will change the world.
OpenAI is a mission-driven company, and our mission is to ensure that artificial general intelligence benefits all of humanity.
And forget the future for a second, we'll revel in the recent past. It's our last show of 2024, so we'll take a look back at this lot's antics and the huge changes the last 12 months have brought. Still standing at the end of a crazy year, Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Susanna Reid, a broadcaster and journalist, and James Reid, the boss of the jobs group, Reid Group. A very warm welcome to our panel and to you. Morning. Let's start, as we always do, by what's making the news today. The Sunday Times and Sunday Telegraph both splash with more extraordinary claims about China's spying efforts in the UK, catching out not just Prince Andrew, but prime ministers. And on the front there, of course, a photograph of Chris McCausland with the Strictly glitter ball. The Observer and the Mirror both lead with fears about the government's housing plans, but the Eye and BBC are both leading with Yvette Cooper's challenges on migration, and we'll hear from her in a few minutes. Let's start, though, with you, and very warm welcome to all of you, with these extraordinary revelations about China spying in the UK, catching out Prince Andrew, Susanna.
Although, does that come as a huge surprise? I mean, Prince Andrew has, as we have seen from his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, slightly questionable judgment when it comes to who he associates with. So, you know, these problems don't seem to afflict the King or Princess Anne or Prince Edward, but Prince Andrew, out of all the royals, is the one who seems to make those kinds of mistakes.
Does seem to have a bit of a knack for getting into trouble. I mean, Andy, you've got a big job now as Mayor of Greater Manchester. You had big jobs in government. When you're in a big high-profile position, does anybody sort of whisper in your ear and say, be careful about who you meet, be careful about who you're photographed with?
Yes, they do. And that's why this is quite a security breach. I'm staggered, really, what's being reported today. Because, you know, even in my organisation now, people will do due diligence before meetings take place. But absolutely at the heart of government, the Prime Minister obviously should have, you know, the highest level of screening, if you like, before people get through to meet you. You can be out on the campaign trail, Laura, sometimes, and a photo taken with somebody you don't know or at a party conference. That's a little different. Having a meeting in a government building is, I would say, quite a serious breach, and there are big questions, I would say, for the security services here.
And David Cameron and Theresa May, it's been reported, also met this Chinese spy, although their offices both say they don't remember it and nothing serious was discussed. But James, it's tricky, isn't it, this relationship with China, because we need China for the economy, for your world of creating jobs and business. But then also, you know, politicians want to sup with a long spoon because of things like this.
Well, it's a case of be careful who your friends are, I think. And it's interesting, this, because looking at the paper, the Chinese spy's face is faded out, which isn't helpful to people who might want to know who the Chinese spy is. so you know, I'm wondering, you know, who this person is, and they might be sidling up to at any point saying, how are you getting on? So, and that's true of all walks of life, really. We have a screening business that checks people out, based in Manchester, funny enough, employs over 100 people. And finding out, if you want. We'll do our best. We'd like to. And but it's so important to know who someone is and who you can trust, well, and more now so than ever.
Well, it's a story of our times, I think. Certainly not the first and probably not the last of its kind. All three of you will be back with you in a while, because being the Home Secretary is both a dream and a nightmare for politicians. These days, they have to try and solve a problem way beyond police or public order here, that treacherous trade that smuggles human cargo to the UK, alongside what we've just been talking about, a more and more complicated patchwork of espionage and people trying to target the UK for bad reasons. Yesterday, we travelled to Rome with the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, where she was meeting her Italian opposite numbers. And we talked about small boats and spies.
Well, we have huge expertise in our intelligence and security agencies. They monitor for not just risks around terror threats, but also threats from hostile states, from different state actors, different challenges to our UK security. And that's the bread and butter of what they do. They do an extremely good job, and where they raise cases, we take action on them, and we will continue to do so.
Is this a threat that is becoming more grave, however? I mean, the head of MI5 recently said there was a lot of evidence of patient, well-funded and deceptive campaigns, and he did say threats from sabotage and espionage are becoming more serious.
Well, one of the things that the head of MI5 has made clear, and it's certainly something that I have seen in the course of this job, is that the kind of challenges to the UK's security have become much more complex. So you have different patterns of action from China, also more direct threats ranging from cybersecurity or the use of criminal proxies from countries like Russia and from Iran.
What would your message, though, be to the Chinese state? I mean, the Prime Minister met President Xi not so long ago, the first such meeting to take place in a while. But what would your message be to the Chinese state?
Well, we will continue to take a very strong approach to our national security. That includes to any challenge to our national security, including to our economic security from China, from other countries around the world. That will always be the approach that we will take. Of course, with China, we also need to make sure we have that economic interaction, economic cooperation in place as well. So it's a complex arrangement.
Let's then talk about Asylum and why you are here. What are you hoping to achieve during this visit?
Well, this is part of a programme of work that we are determined to take forward to restore order and control both to our borders and also to our asylum and immigration systems. We face the dangerous boat crossings in the Channel, which undermine border security and put lives at risk. And we've been very clear, we need to go after the criminal gangs that organise and profit for them. Those gangs operate across borders, and that is why law enforcement and governments need to operate across borders as well. So that's why I'm here talking to the Italian Interior Minister, just as I've been talking earlier in the week to the French, the German, the Belgian and Netherlands Interior Ministers in the Calais group about our stronger cooperation on law enforcement, and why we've got new agreements in place, both with Germany and with the Iraqi government as well.
How can viewers, though, have confidence that that approach is the right one, when actually during your time in charge, the number of boats making that dangerous crossing, putting lives at risk, has increased? And also the number of hotels being used to house people who've come to the UK without permission in the UK, that's gone up too. So why should people think you're taking the right approach?
Well, what we inherited from the first half of this year, the first half of the year had record high levels of boat crossings. Had that continued, we were on track really for the worst year ever for small boat crossings. Had that continued, we would have had many thousands more crossings over the course of the summer and through the autumn. As it is, we're around a quarter lower than 2022. That was the peak year. But look, that is no comfort when you still have these small boat crossings where we've got lives being put at risk and huge numbers of lives being lost, and also these criminal gangs are profiting from the undermining our border security.
And the numbers have gone
well.
up during your time in charge. So, and I'm aware, we're coming up to the 6-month milestone
But the numbers, compared to the first half of the year, we had record highs. We haven't had that record high level. That could have taken us potentially up to 50,000 crossings this year. We haven't had that, but let's be clear, the scale of the boat crossings that we're seeing is deeply damaging, undermines border security and puts lives at risk.
I suppose the question, though, that our viewers watching and listening to you today have, though, is when will they see a difference? People see the numbers continuing to go up. People see more hotels being used to house people without permission in their towns. People arrive without support. That can have a very detrimental effect on them as individuals. You've said to yourself before, that doesn't work for anyone. So when can people expect to see a difference? When can you expect to see the numbers of small boats coming down if your approach is the right one?
Just briefly on the asylum hotels, and let me come back to the border security issue. The last few months before the election, and we were not aware of the scale of what the government was doing, they had just effectively crashed the asylum system. So asylum decisions dropped by around 70%, asylum interviews dropped by around 80%. So that meant in July, we had then suddenly a soaring backlog, a whole series of cases stacked up. We've had to manage that through the summer. That's had an impact on asylum accommodation, but we do now have the asylum decisions are back up to where they were. We do now have the asylum backlog coming down because we're clear we need to be taking people out of asylum hotels. We need to be clearing that backlog and ending the use of asylum hotels and also saving hundreds of millions of pounds, if not billions of pounds for the taxpayer.
But you've been opening more.
So, well, that's the result of the what we've inherited with the collapse in decision making. So it is really important we've now got the backlog coming down because that is part of just restoring order to the system rather than the chaos that we had. Come back to the issue around the border security. What's been interesting in Italy is they have worked on prevention. They have worked with other countries. They've worked with countries across North Africa. They have seen, as a result of the work they've done, a more than 50% reduction in Mediterranean boat crossings. And they've been clear that you need to combine strong law enforcement and prevention work as well. But the one thing you will hear the Italian Prime Minister say repeatedly is no country can do this alone. We have to work together.
You give there the example that Italy, who's been able to cut their number of arrivals significantly by working more with other countries. But I do think the question that people want to know is when will they see a difference? And, you know, this government now seems to be fond of giving us timelines and targets and milestones or whatever you want to call them. So when can people expect to see a difference, to see the number of boats crossing coming down, to see the number of asylum hotels coming down too?
Well, we're already reducing the backlog. So we are already on the asylum backlog.
Yes, that's a different question.
So go back to the boat. So on the asylum backlog and the hotel use, we are already making progress and we are already bringing the backlog down. And so we expect to continue to make progress on that through the winter.
But
on
to be
the boat
clear also
crossings,
with people, reducing the backlog also means allowing more people to stay. And those people also will need housing, they'll need health, they'll need jobs.
Well, it also means increasing returns. And one of the biggest changes that we have seen since the election is we moved people who were working on the failing Rwanda scheme that had sent 4 volunteers to Kigali. They had 1,000 people working on that scheme, that completely failed scheme. We have moved people in. We've actually moved around 1,000 people into returns and enforcement. And as a result of that, we're now on track for over 13,000 removals, returns since the election, a big increase in returns and also a big increase in the raids on illegal working, a big increase on arrests and enforcement because the rules have to be respected and enforced. They just haven't been for far too long.
But I will ask you again, when can our viewers expect to see the number of people making small boat crossings, putting their lives at risk trying to get to the UK? When can they expect that to come down?
So of course we want to continue to see progress. Of course we want to see the boat crossings come down as rapidly as possible. What we're not going to do is deal this by slogans. So, Rishi Sunak did say,
it's not about slogans. But Home Secretary, this is not about slogans. When it comes to something like waiting lists and in the NHS, the government's very happy to put targets publicly on that and say, measure us by whether we hit those. When it comes to kids' education, the government's been very happy to put a target on that, saying, judge us by this measure. When it comes to this issue, you won't give us a yardstick by when we could know when people can actually expect there'll be a significant difference. Why not? Because it makes it feel like it's not a priority to the government in the way that some other issues are.
Well, quite the opposite. We've made clear that the border security is actually one of the foundational issues before you even get to any of the missions. It's one of the big foundations, and we've been clear we need to reduce both legal migration and illegal migration, that we need to be... It's the clear priority for the government in terms of tackling these dangerous boat crossings. There is a history of Home Secretaries and Prime Ministers making grand promises but never actually having a proper plan. The approach we're taking to this is really step by step. We are putting in place the things that we need, the agreements with other countries, the stronger returns arrangements, the much stronger law enforcement, the operations with Germany to go after the smugglers, supply chains, the operations with Italy to go after the illicit finance.
But you're asking people to be patient then with the existing situation?
Well, I think we're being very clear and straight with people about the complexity of this, because the gimmicks did not work. What we had previously was a whole load of gimmicks. Everybody promised it was going to solve it immediately, and what we're doing is the very serious action. We've already substantially increased. We've had over 25% increase in terms of the returns. We're having over 30% increase in enforcement raids. So we're already increasing step by step. But of course, this is complex, and of course, this takes time.
What you, though, call gimmicks, other people call strong deterrence.
Yeah,
now,
but it wasn't,
we know
was
that
it?
you ditched the Conservatives' Rwanda plan, and frankly, our viewers know no one can tell whether it worked or not because it didn't happen. Conservatives say it would have had an effect. You say it was a disaster and it never would have done.
It ran for 2.5 years.
But we will never know.
2.5 years, £700 million,
but we'll never
and
know.
4 volunteers that they sent to
ask
Rwanda.
you,
I mean, that is just a total failing scheme.
But we'll never know because it didn't happen. However, you said on our programme a while ago that you were interested in the idea of using another country maybe for processing claims. Italy, where we're speaking today, has started, not with huge success, but to use Albania to process people. Are you still, in principle, open to the idea of using other countries as sites where people who want to live in the UK could have their claims looked at and processed, to use the jargon? Are you still interested in that?
So we will look at whatever works. Clearly, everything has to meet proper international standards. Clearly, something has to be effective and has to deliver results. The interesting thing about the Italy-Albania arrangement, and you're right, that hasn't fully started yet. The interesting thing about that is that at the heart of it is a plan to effectively fast-track cases from predominantly safe countries. We are interested in doing that in the UK, is to fast-track decisions for people arriving from countries that are predominantly safe, where we should be able to take those decisions very swiftly and also be able to return people very swiftly. That hasn't happened in the past, so we are interested to develop that in the UK. We think that's an important principle.
But potentially you might still be interested in looking at other countries for processing.
We will look at whatever works. But I think the key thing is to be just really practical, and that's why we've been focusing on the law enforcement, on being able to take out some of the criminal gangs, but also to be able to fast-track those decisions and returns.
On the flip side, though, if you speak to refugee groups or someone like your old colleague, David Miliband, they would say, actually, this is about a historic movement of peoples desperate for a better life. And the only way to deal with this properly is to open up more safe routes where people can come more easily to the UK or other Western countries. But you won't look at that. Why not?
Well, we have always had different kinds of safe ways for resettlement and for support for refugees. That will always continue to be the case, because whether that be around Ukraine, whether that be around the work that we have done on Afghanistan, whether that be on Hong Kong, all of that's important. So all countries should do their bit to help those who have fled persecution and conflict. But whatever you do on that side, unless you go after the criminal gangs, then this kind of smuggling and trafficking will continue, because the gangs have a criminal industry. They will just advertise for more places. So therefore, that's why I think you've got to go after the criminal gangs in order to deal with this.
One of your own ministers said it was like whack-a-mole. You know, you take out a gang somewhere and they pop up somewhere else. So are you really confident that law enforcement alone and returns is going to actually solve this problem in an effective way and make a big difference? Because you've got critics on the left and right who say what you're putting forward, fine, that's what everybody would want to do. You want to enforce the law, you want to work with other countries. But what you're putting forward is not radical enough to tackle a problem of this scale.
Well, if you go back six years or so, there were barely any boat crossings across the Channel. Since then, an entire criminal industry has grown up along our border, organising these boats, bringing in these flimsy plastic boats from China or Turkey or across the continent, supplying the engines, huge financial money networks that they use in order to take the payments for it. This is a criminal industry. They've got advertising online, on TikTok, on Facebook and so on. That criminal industry has grown up in the space of 6 years and been allowed to take hold. We should not be allowing those gangs to get away with it. And that's why I do think very strongly it is right to be going after those criminal gangs, not to just shrug our shoulders and say, oh, well, the criminal organised smuggler gangs will always be with us and therefore we should do nothing. We have a responsibility, a moral responsibility, to go after those gangs who are putting lives at risk. When you see these flimsy boats, the way that it's women and kids who get put in the middle of the boat. So when the boat folds, they are the people who get crushed, who end up drowning. This incredibly dangerous boats in the Channel, and it undermines our border security. So I do believe we have to go after the criminal gangs. You'll hear the Prime Minister Keir Starmer will talk about the work that he did when he was the Director of Public Prosecutions to go after the terrorist gangs.
I don't think there's a single person watching who would think that you should just let the gangs do this. But do you really think that you can end that trade once and for all?
So I do believe that you can tackle this trade of organised gangs, and partly because what I've seen through, the talking to other countries, the work that we've done looking at France, Germany, the visit to Iraq as well, actually I think our law enforcement across borders has been far, far too weak. You can see all kinds of different areas where we could be operating much more strongly between us.
Just one final question, if I may, because it's the first time we've spoken to you since the election, and you're one of the few government ministers who's gone back into government. You'd done it before. I think it's fair to say it's been quite a bumpy time. Would it have been better if more of your colleagues had had experience in government like you?
If you're asking me, would it have been better if we hadn't had 14 years in opposition, then yes, I strongly agree with you, and then more people would have had recent experience, because 14 years of opposition, has been a tough period. What it also means, though, is I do think we have inherited actually is a much more difficult situation than in 97 when I was first elected. A lot of damage had been done in 97, but that is nothing compared to really the damage, the chaos really throughout the system, damage to the economy, to the public finances, the scale of damage to the public finances and to our public services. We've seen it in policing, but the NHS, I see in my own constituency, the huge damage to the NHS. That is a challenge to deal with that. That leads to much more serious challenges than I think we faced last time round. But that's why I think we've been so determined to move at such pace over the last 6 months.
Yvette Cooper, thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Thanks, Laura.
Well, her opposite number, Chris Philp, who until July was a minister in the Home Office. Now you're the Shadow Home Office Minister. You are with us today. The Home Secretary told us there have been more returns of migrants in a 6-month period than in 5 years. There have been more raids on illegal workplaces. There have been more arrests. You must be pleased to hear that.
Well, they've been continuing the work of the previous government. Those trends of more removals have continued. But there are, of course, a couple of points worth highlighting. One of those is that the vast majority of those returns are to European and North American countries, firstly. And secondly, in Labour's first 3 months in office, they returned small boat arrivals in relatively small numbers. Their small boat returns actually went down compared to the 3 months before the election and amounted to under 5% of small boat arrivals. So when you look at those figures, not quite so impressive.
But you spectacularly broke your promise to stop the boats, which was slapped over every government lectern going. It was on every poster, every backdrop to every Conservative Party event. Isn't Yvette Cooper absolutely right to say now she's in charge of the Home Office now that progress is really being made?
Well, first of all, the small boat crossings last year, 2023, went down by a third compared to the previous year. So the plan was
a record high, and it's developed as a phenomenon.
So we started getting the numbers down. Now, by contrast, since the election in the last 5 months, the number of boat crossings are up by 18% compared to the same period last year. So under Labour, boat crossings are going up. Now, I think they made a huge mistake by cancelling the Rwanda deterrent before it even started. The first flight was due to go off on the 24th of July. Now, we know deterrents are important because the National Crime Agency have told us that law enforcement alone isn't enough. You need a deterrent. And we've seen other countries successfully use deterrents.
But I'd also remind you and our viewers that there were challenges waiting in the courts for the Rwanda scheme. And there might have been a plane booked, but you can't be certain that Rwanda would ever have got off the ground in a meaningful way, just as Labour can't be sure that it would never have worked. That is an unknowable situation.
Well, we'd passed a law, the Safety of Rwanda Act, to make sure those flights could take off. We legislated to deal with the legal issues. The first plane,
there were cases in the courts.
Hang on. The first plane was due to take off on the 24th of July, and we know from Australia that these deterrents do work. Now, about 10 years ago, Australia had a very similar problem to us, with boats going from Indonesia to Australia in similarly high numbers. And they established a deterrent. They used Nauru, which is an island in the Pacific, rather than Rwanda. But when the Australians started doing that, very rapidly, the boat crossings completely stopped. So we can see a deterrent works. Yet Labour cancelled it before it started. And we had migrants,
I just want to make this point again.
We had migrants in Calais saying they were delighted when Keir Starmer was elected Prime Minister, which tells you a lot.
But our viewers are very well aware that it's unknowable whether Rwanda would have made a difference. And also the 20-mile channel crossing is very, very different to the seas around Australia when people are coming from far, far bigger distances. However, as I say, it's an unknowable.
Well, hang on.
The question in terms of what you want to do now...
Wait a minute. What is knowable is with Albanians who are coming across the channel. We did a returns agreement with Albania a couple of years ago, and we started returning them, and that led to a 93% reduction in Albanians crossing. So that shows you, in the context of the channel, that removing people quickly when they arrive does deter them, and it's common sense. If you're a migrant in Calais...
So if you can do deterrent with returns, then you don't need something like Rwanda.
Well, we were able to...
point.
No, not at all. We were able to return people specifically to Albania, but some of the other nationalities, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, they are much harder to return to, and that is why you need a safe third country like Rwanda, exactly as Australia did. It worked in Australia, and it would have worked here, but they cancelled it. And that's why numbers are up 18% since the election.
But it's interesting, you still are very, very fixed on the possibilities and the opportunities of a plan like Rwanda. But if you were to return to government, would you resurrect that plan? Is that still Conservative Party policy?
Yes, we would aim to resurrect a deterrent-style scheme. Now, whether the Rwanda scheme is still available in 5 years' time, we'll have to see. But certainly a deterrent scheme like that, where if somebody crosses the channel, dangerously, illegally and unnecessarily because France is safe, they will rapidly be removed somewhere else. And if you do that, it's common sense that the people who are thinking of crossing simply won't do so. It's also very telling that when Keir Starmer stood up last week and announced his milestones, or whatever he calls them now, stopping illegal immigration was not even one of Keir Starmer's priorities.
What you say now is that you would put in a hard, low cap on legal migration. Right. Now, what is a hard, low cap? We know it was record nearly 1 million last year. What does hard and low mean?
Yep, so hard means legally binding. We would simply stop issuing visas when the cap was reached, so there's no way that can be circumvented, and we would set that out in law. In terms of numbers, we haven't set a number yet, but we're working on that at the moment. But it will be broadly speaking, it'll be far, far lower than the figures that were published a couple of weeks ago. And it'll also be far, far lower than the OBR forecast accompanying the budget that was 350,000 per year. Interestingly, Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper have refused to set out a cap at all. So there's a big difference there between the parties. And one other point, Laura, the measures that we took in government towards the end of our period in office have begun to reduce those legal numbers. Legal migration was down 20%, but the issue of visas, which are a leading indicator, to get the visa sort of typically 3 or 6 months before travelling, those are down even more. So social care visas, which had been a huge route, those are down by 84%. Student dependents down 84%. Student visas down 19%. Work visas down 28%. So those measures we took, perhaps too late, but those measures we took are already having an effect at forcing down legal migration.
Those measures, as you've just said, came too late for many people.
They should have been done earlier.
And right now, some Conservatives believe that actually you're not saying enough yet on what your next plans would be. Ben Houchen, who's the mayor of Teesside, was with us last week, a Conservative, and he said there's a risk you're leaving a vacuum for Nigel Farage's Reform Party because you're not yet saying enough about what you would do, particularly on the issue of immigration. What do you say to that?
Well, Kemi and I gave a speech on this a couple of weeks ago in which we acknowledged the migration numbers have been far too high and that successive governments over the years have made mistakes. I've already explained how the measures we took in government are getting these numbers down already. We've talked about restoring a Rwanda-style deterrent. We've talked about a legally binding hard cap. And there'll be more. Kemi's also talked about limiting welfare entitlements even further for people who come here, because if they come here to work, they should, of course, do so rather than claiming benefits or social housing. So you'll hear a lot more about this in the coming months. But as I say, Kemi and I started that process with our speeches a couple of weeks ago.
OK, and briefly, if I can, extraordinary revelations about Chinese spying involving prime ministers being targeted as well as Prince Andrew. Your colleague Tom Tugendhat in the party says there should be an investigation. Do you agree?
I think this needs looking at very carefully. But look, this question of Chinese influence is not a new one. It's been around for years or even decades. They've been systematically trying to infiltrate universities to steal intellectual property, businesses for the same reason, and also influencing government institutions. We remember, of course, that Chinese agent who paid a lot of money to a Labour Party member of Parliament. So we need to be super vigilant, publicly expose Chinese infiltration where it happens, and everybody in academia, in business, in government needs to be alert. And if anyone has the slightest concern, they should contact the security services immediately.
OK, well, Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Always good to have you with us in the studio. And as ever, you've been busy throughout 2024 telling us what you think about what we discuss in the studio. Keep doing it, please. You can email us, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or if you're social media minded, you can use the hashtag BBC Laura K, and the WhatsApp number is there, and I promise I'll learn it for 2025. Let's then go to our panel. Susanna, it's obvious Yvette Cooper doesn't want to repeat what she sees as the political mistakes of previous governments by making a promise and then spectacularly failing to keep it. But do you think that matters to public confidence when she sort of says, oh, I just can't tell you?
Yes, I do. I think that successive governments have failed to tell a positive story on immigration. We rely on immigration to run our public services, to grow our economy. But there is huge concern about how we support the immigrants who come. And, you know, with all due respect to Chris Philp, how he can lecture the current government on immigration when it was under the previous government, that it went up, legal net migration went up to almost 1 million in the year to June 2023 is kind of remarkable, because anybody is going to be worried that if you have that scale of legal migrants coming in, how are you going to support them in the NHS? How are you going to support them with housing? And I think what governments need to do is say, we need migrants. They are positive and valuable contributors to our society. But this is the number roughly we need. Because otherwise you get into this kind of binary position where you have the government saying, well, I know it wasn't one of the milestones, but it's on page 18 of the plan for change, and we're going to lower immigration. That sounds like immigration is a bad thing. We're going to lower it because immigrants are bad. But they're not bad. And then you hand over the political argument to reform and a sort of Farage's proposal of one in, one out.
Well, it's interesting because for Labour, Auntie Burnham, there is a risk to them from reform at the moment, particularly on illegal immigration and the small boats, and also the public unhappiness at sometimes asylum seekers arriving to live in their communities where there isn't the right infrastructure, there isn't right support. In your patch in Altrincham in Cheshire, there's suddenly a new asylum hotel with 300 people arriving. Do you think there's a political risk for your party on this issue?
Well, always, but I have great confidence in Yvette Cooper. She is one of the most experienced and knowledgeable ministers that there is. You know, she's one of the best politicians of our era, and what she laid out in the interview is exactly what she would be doing. She talked about the agreements that have to be put in place with other countries. That's the hard work. I did it in the Blair government. You have to be on the phone to ministers in other governments.
So you were actually immigration minister at that point, weren't you?
I was. And this is the thing, and let me get to reform, because Susanna rightly raised it. Going forward from here in 2025, they need to be held to account for the consequences of their own policies.
Reform should.
The big lie of Brexit, in my view, needs to be exposed because they promised us that it would control immigration. It's done the opposite. It's weakened control of immigration because it's weakened those relationships with our neighbours that are absolutely critical to having an orderly system. But at the same time, it's changed the nature of migration. So they've been issuing more and more visas for people coming from further afield, staying permanently, whereas with free movement, it would have been somebody would come for a few years and then go back. So absolutely, I have confidence in what Yvette is doing. It's going to be hard. It was just interesting, if I could just say, listening to the Shadow Home Secretary about the Rwanda scheme. If they were so confident in it, I think they would have delayed the general election, wouldn't they, to when the first planes took off. But it's noticeable that they didn't do that because they know it was a colossal failure and waste of money. And they, like with everything else, they weren't prepared to kind of own any of their issues. They cut and run. And just to hear all of that just now was just
really wound you up, hasn't it?
It has, because they're just not. There's no humility there in saying yes, we failed. We need to learn the lessons. I didn't hear that from the Shadow Home Secretary.
Let's then talk, though, about the economy, because, James, your company is massive. You spend your life studying the jobs market. How dependent at the moment are we on legal migration?
Well, legal migration is very important for filling all sorts of jobs in the economy, particularly in health and social care. And we're dependent on it importantly. But I think the numbers have surprised people. So over the last 2 years, 1.6 million net immigration. It was much higher than most people were expecting. And that's 2 cities of Liverpool. So that's a lot of people. Where are they going? How are we looking after them? Where are they being housed? So how do we make that work, I think, is a live issue.
And in terms of the temperature of the economy at the moment, you're in contact with exactly what's going on all around the country. What signs are you seeing? Because alongside immigration, the massive challenge for this government is to get the economy growing. They say it's number 1 on their list, but what are the clues that you see?
Well, we're like the crow's nest on a ship because we get the vacancies coming into our website early, so we see what's happening in the labour market, which is a leading indicator. And the economy's cooling, and we can see that very clearly. And it's been cooling for several months, since the summer. And most recently, our data for November showed job numbers, vacancies falling 13% month on month. 13%, and that's 26% down year on year. So that's a very significant decline. That worries me because when I've seen that in the past, it's been an indication that recession is around the corner. And we might see a dip and unemployment will rise.
And do you think that's possible then? That's what we're heading towards?
Yeah, I should call it out. The budget has spooked business. And we've seen that. And this big black hole of 22 billion we've heard so much about has become 1 million black holes in company balance sheets up and down the country. And all these businesses are looking at what are we going to do about this? And the answers to that question are not good. We're going to cut hiring, we're going to make people redundant, we're not going to invest, we're going to offshore jobs. So that is a big issue. And I would urge a rethink on this because I think taxing jobs right now is not a good idea. And there are better things to tax. You could tax fuel, you could tax gambling, you could tax high value property, you could tax imports, but not jobs, please.
Very interesting to see how that will unfold in the next couple of months. Andy, there's another big thing the government's doing this week, sneaking in just before Christmas, the Devolution white paper. Yes. In other words, their plan of how to give, I suppose, people like you even more power. Are you happy with what you think you're going to get?
It's certainly a proud moment for Greater Manchester because people before me, Sir Howard Bernstein, Sir Richard Lees, pioneered a new model of running things. And the devolution that we have had over the last 10 or so years has brought a higher level of growth in our city region than the UK growth rate, which, if you go back in the north, that wasn't the case in my youth, but it is today, and the skyline of Manchester tells that story, and it's good now that that will be extended to all parts of England. I think this is a real shift in the way the country is run. The British state is tilting away from Whitehall and Westminster for the first time properly, and towards the regions. For us, it's going to mean more control over rail. So we're bringing in the B network, an integrated public transport system like London, and we'll finish the re-regulation of buses in January. We'll have a London payment system in March. And then we want to bring rail into the B network. And the white paper, I understand, is going to promise that. But there is a big area where, in my view, it's not going far enough. and that is on post-16 education. And I think all the mayors feel the same about this. The Department for Education takes a very centralising view of these things. But in my view, they're risking putting a brake on growth. As James is saying, this could be another problem, because post-16 technical education is a local thing. You've got to work with a local labour market, local employers. The vacancies are a risk. We had the Home Builders Federation saying yesterday that they were worried there weren't enough skilled people out there to meet the 1.5 million homes
so
commitment.
You've been on the blower to Bridget Phillipson and Keir Starmer saying, give me control of that too.
I have, and I'm pleased I've got enough support to bring in the Greater Manchester Baccalaureate, because we have some devolved power here. That's what I call an equal alternative to the university route. I think we badly need that. The Department for Education is often obsessed on the university route. I'm saying, no, we are going to bring in an equal alternative to university, and I've got enough power to bring that forward. But I would say to them, this is an area to go further, because growth depends on filling those vacancies, bringing through young people with the qualifications that we need. And as a country, we've never done this well. There's always been a snobbery about technical education.
All right, well, you've made
the
your
devolved
pitch.
areas are ready to fix it.
You've made your pitch. Susanna, just briefly to you, we're about to have a conversation with two American tech entrepreneurs about artificial intelligence. And I just wonder, whenever we raise this subject, there's often a lot of fear about what it will mean for jobs here. What do you think? Do you worry about it?
I'm excited about it. I think there's lots of opportunities in AI. What I wonder is, with the development of people using likenesses, at what point will we be able to say, I'd like a Sunday morning programme, but not Sunday morning, but I want Laura Kuenssberg to be presenting it, but I, want her in my favourite football shirt, and I only want news about, for instance, the cost of living and my favourite football club, and I want it right now, and AI will be able to generate that, and you won't have any control about the news that you are then presenting.
Oh,
and I think,
blimey, or indeed have a job. But we all have jobs at the moment, so let's be grateful to that. So let's get our head around this. Computers are getting so clever. They are more and more able to make decisions and do things without our instruction. The more sophisticated forms of AI, artificial intelligence, can do all sorts of things. And a new startup founded by two of the best-known tech bosses, called Sierra AI, promised to make chatbots much more helpful and much less irritating. And the founders promise a whole new way of communicating between man and machine.
Probably, if you're like me, you probably send most of your emails by using your thumbs on your smartphone every day rather than typing on a keyboard. We started this company because we think with the advent of large language models and ChatGPT, if you fast forward 3 or 4 years, most of the way we're going to interact digitally is by having a conversation. And we're trying to help all the consumer brands in the world make an AI agent so they can directly talk to their customers with AI.
So Clay, if I've just landed from Mars and I don't know what an AI agent is and I'm not familiar with any of these tech terms, in really simple terms, explain what it is and how it might change my life.
AI agents are autonomous pieces of software that you can give a goal and a set of guardrails to, and then have that piece of software independently on its own solve problems and get things done for you. And so in the future, you and we will all have personal AI assistants and personal AI agents. Where we're really focused on is building companies' AI agents to interact with their customers and help their customers get things done, from returns, exchanges, getting product advice and setup, and more.
But right now, many people listening or watching to this will think, when I see a chatbot pop up on a website that's trying to help me make a reservation or it's trying to help me with some kind of inquiry, actually, they're often really annoying. They don't understand what I'm trying to tell them or ask them. And why will this be any better? Because sometimes these are just a pain and all you want to do is talk to a human being.
Well, you're not alone. I think if you surveyed BBC viewers and you asked, do you like chatbots, probably 0 out of 100 would say yes. On the other hand, if you ask the same 100 people, do you like ChatGPT, my guess is nearly 100 out of 100 would say yes. What is the difference? Well, one simple way is it actually works. One of these technologies is empathetic, is multilingual, can really understand sarcasm and nuance and understand a lot of context that these previously chatbots couldn't. And so, with the advent of technologies that power technologies like ChatGPT, these conversational agents actually work now.
And in a few years, if consumers love it and it all works, what does that then look like? What kind of practical changes might there be to my life as a consumer, going about my business, interacting with technologies?
So if you call up a company today and have a phone call, how much do you think that phone call costs for the company? On the order of $10 to $20 for a single phone call. And so it's very expensive. Now with AI, that same conversation can cost maybe 10 to 20 cents, or maybe over time 1 to 2 cents.
But do you admit, though, that as part of that transition, and maybe it will only be a transition, but part of that transition will mean more traditional jobs disappearing?
I think that with every new technology, jobs definitely change. So I think you're correct. It is a transition. I just look back at, moving from an agrarian economy to an industrial economy to a services economy as the economies become more global. Our jobs have all changed. So I think the transition, like any transition, might be uncomfortable, but I'm really excited for the new jobs that will emerge on the other side.
But Clay, one of the things some guests on our show in the last year have told us is that there are, two paths for AI, especially as we move towards, more sophisticated generative AI, things that can do things that are superhuman, not the kind of more basic levels of artificial intelligence that's already in all of our phones, in all of our computers that we're already using, whether we like it or not. There are two paths, perhaps, human-controlled or out of control. Do you think that there are real concerns and actually governments need to be thinking about stronger regulation?
Well, I think, first of all, two paths implies kind of black or white. I think it's only, the only path that I think is acceptable is in control. But I think there's a balance in terms of regulation and conservatism around limiting research and so on in AI. And I think the balance to be struck is how do you ensure that, on the one hand, we're being conservative to ensure that some of the worst case scenarios cannot happen, but are also benefiting from the gains, the very real gains of AI.
But Bret, you're also chair of OpenAI, which is, one of the most exciting, fast developing, potentially one of the most influential companies we're going to see in the next decade. And there's been a number of high profile departures of some staff who've been concerned that the safety of this new technology isn't being taken seriously enough. I mean, are they wrong, or should we just relax about it? What do you think?
OpenAI is a mission-driven company, and our mission is to ensure that artificial general intelligence benefits all of humanity. And even saying that sentence, it's sort of an ink blot test for your optimism or your pessimism about the future of AI. Benefiting humanity could mean, is it widely distributed? Is there a digital divide? Benefiting humanity could be about safety. And for all of us involved in the organization, it's about all of the above. So I think it doesn't surprise me that there's meaningful disagreements about the interpretation of that mission. Even as Clay was saying, how do you balance the risks of the benefits and the downsides? I feel incredible confidence in the integrity and the commitment of OpenAI to safety. It's a topic of conversation in every board meeting, in every management team discussion, and I think people really authentically care about it.
But one of the interesting things is when it was founded as a not-for-profit. Now it's making the transition to profit. Is there a risk, frankly, that the big AI companies follow that kind of path and they end up pursuing profit over the benefits that the technology could provide all of us?
OpenAI is a mission-driven company. We are a mission-driven nonprofit. As the chairman of the board, I have a fiduciary duty to one thing, which is the mission of the company, which is to ensure AGI benefits humanity.
Clay, how do you see that balance? And I suppose maybe in your own life, what have the negatives been?
Well, I think first of all, the negatives, I think as with any new technology, there will be destabilizing aspects to it. We talked about changes in jobs, jobs which turn into new jobs, jobs which go away and which are replaced by new types of jobs. I think on the upside and what I'm excited about in my professional life, it's suddenly as if I have access to this array of expert assistants to help me in whatever I'm doing.
And Bret, I mean, there is dramatic potential in the technology. There has also been quite a lot of boardroom drama in this world. There's, a legal battle between OpenAI and Elon Musk, but there was also drama around the boss of OpenAI, Sam Altman. You stepped in, seemed to be part of getting him back onto the board after a big bust-up last year. Were you the man who saved his job?
It was a very personal decision to take on this role. It was almost exactly a year ago when I got a phone call, and I heard that Sam had been fired by the previous board, and essentially I was brought in to help mediate an outcome there between the previous board and Sam. And I ended up taking on the job because of how important OpenAI was to my life personally. I don't think either Clay or I would have left our cushy jobs that we had before this to start a startup, if not for OpenAI and ChatGPT really changing how we and the rest of society perceives the impact of AI. Because if you recall, the weekend after that Sam left the company, the company was almost on the verge of collapsing. So I didn't come in with the mindset of necessarily saving his job. I came in to help save OpenAI.
When you talk about OpenAI, this company, do you think it will become in years, something as big as Meta or something as big as Google? Is it a company that has that kind of potential, maybe even to be $1 trillion business one day?
I believe OpenAI has really infinite potential for impact on the world. I think it will become one of the most important organizations in the world, if not already. But I think what's so inspiring about the organization it is really driven by that mission exclusively, which I think is very inspiring.
If it is all about the mission, though, why is it switching to be profit-making? I mean, lots of people who were there in the early days didn't want it to switch to making profit, and that is the journey it's on.
Yeah, I can't comment on sort of the corporate structure or some of the rumors about where we'll go, but I will just talk about sort of the business of AI, which I think is pretty different than when the organization was founded. Put very simply, it takes a lot of capital expenditure to build one of these large language models. And I think if you look around the world, it's very hard to host a non-profit steak dinner and raise $10 billion for a supercomputer. And so most of the modern research labs, not just OpenAI, but also Anthropic and others, have structured their companies so that they have the ability to raise the capital that they need to do to build these models.
Thank you both for speaking to us. We're really grateful.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, a bit of what the future might bring, but frankly, your mind might already have been boggled by the last 12 months. 2024, let's have you.
On the 5th of July, either Keir Starmer or I will be Prime Minister.
One card, 6 steps, in your hand.
Stop the boat.
Stop the boat. What's the one I've missed? I've done them out of order.
To stopping the boat.
Forget all you're looking in your plate.
Higher taxes, higher taxes, higher taxes, higher taxes.
You backed Liz Truss and crashed our economy.
I've changed my mind.
You will be compelled to take part in the National Service.
It's allowed,
Having participated in all the British events with British veterans, I returned home before the International Leaders event later in the day. On reflection, that was a mistake.
The exit poll is predicting a Labour landslide.
Blimey.
Labour has won an absolutely whopping victory in the general election.
We certainly won't be increasing income tax or national insurance.
I am announcing an increase in employers' national insurance contributions.
I don't think I'm being rude.
Politics can be a brutal business.
It certainly has been a brutal business, but brutal and also very positive for some. James, when you think of everything that's happened this year, what stands out?
Well, just looking at that, Laura, I think Ed Davey deserves a round of applause. I mean, I remember watching during the election thinking, who is this guy falling off this paddleboard? Why is he doing that? And by the end of the campaign, I was watching and thinking, I wonder what Ed Davey's up to today. And I think it came over. It was interesting what cut through he achieved with this, because I did think it was ridiculous at the beginning, but it really worked.
And it really
he came
worked.
over as a likeable, decent man, and he got results. He got the best result in, 100 years for the Liberal Party?
Certainly did.
I thought it was really interesting.
Susanna, what about you?
Well, it was an extraordinary election result for the Labour Party, but I think my political moment of the year was that within weeks of winning, they announced they were going to ask pensioners to help pay off this £22 billion black hole and withdraw the winter fuel allowance from anyone who's not on pension credit. And the threshold then was at around £12,000. And I think a lot of people who voted Labour thought, hang on a moment, I'm not sure I voted for a Labour government to then take money away from the poorest in our society. Many people supported the fact that winter fuel allowance is paid to millionaires and that needs to be taken away, but the threshold was set very low. And of course, this came at exactly the moment that members of the Labour government, including the new Prime Minister, were being criticised for accepting freebies of thousands of pounds. So on the one hand, they're accepting freebies, and on the other, they are asking people on £12,000 incomes to go without up to £300 at a time when we've got a winter where fuel bills have gone up.
I mean, Andy, were you surprised by the sort of early missteps of Starmer's team?
I think going into government is really difficult, and as Yvette Cooper said, I don't think any government's had a worse inheritance than this. Honestly, on every level. I actually, on the record, agree with you. I think there was a case for reform because it does go to very wealthy pensioners, and whether that's justifiable, I would say possibly not. But the threshold, I said, like you, Susanna, probably should have been higher.
And for you, Andy, what would be the big thing that sticks in your mind for 2024?
I mean, the image of the year was on the screen, wasn't it? Rishi in his suit outside Downing Street. If he'd spent more time in Manchester, he would have known to have an umbrella with him at his side, and that wouldn't have happened. But the sadness for me was that came, the calling of the general election, 4 days after, I think, the single biggest political event of the year, which was the conclusions of the infected blood inquiry, because they were earth-shattering. Basically, Whitehall should have been rocked to its foundations. The British state lied about infected blood for 5 decades and caused huge damage to, honestly, thousands and thousands of British families, and lied to me as Health Secretary, saying that nobody was knowingly given unsafe blood products. They were. And it's just the frustration sometimes of Westminster that the attention just goes off something that fundamental.
Which has made a change to a lot of people's lives.
And there is still another outstanding injustice, nuclear test veterans, very similar to infected blood. Please, in 2025, justice for those nuclear test veterans.
OK, well, a reminder there, as we draw to a close, that change can be a very long time coming, but sometimes, in the end, it does arrive. It's been great having the three of you with us for the last show of the year. It has been quite a ride in the last 12 months. Thank you to all of our guests today, and thank you most of all to you for watching throughout 2024. I'll be on Newscast with Paddy. There's a festive wave. There he is. Oh, quite a delicate little wave there. And we'll be on BBC Sounds together later on this afternoon, and I can't wait to see you back here in 2025. We are back on air on the 5th of January, so a very happy Christmas or holiday season to you all. And as we sometimes do, we love to leave you with something just beautiful, just because we can. So whatever you're doing, wherever you are, do enjoy this. The singer Benjamin Apple, whose new Christmas album has this gorgeous version of an old Christmas treasure. Goodbye.
Einsam wacht, nur das